Debrief today, fill out the attendance link.
Did you actually fill out the link this time, Nick?
No, I did it last time. All right, so Advanced Linux, again, this Thursday, 6 p.m., East Hall 001 in the basement. We're going to cover WinBind, basically how to integrate Linux systems into an Active Directory network. So you have that centralized authentication. It's more of a big thing for our long-term events where you have time to set this up. It's very tricky at the firewall level, so we have to be a little bit careful. But we'll talk more about that on Thursday. So the plans for tonight. We're going to get questions from you guys, feedback on what you liked and didn't like about the mock, things you'd like to know, anything specific about the environment, anything like that. Then Dylan and Tommy and Nathan are going to come down and talk about injects for a little bit, what you can do to improve on that. And then I'm going to cover basically how to not shoot yourself in the foot and our basically high-level strategy for how we secure our networks in CCDC. So first, questions. Does anybody have any questions about the environment, why something broke, anything they're not sure of?
Is there any way on the Windows side of things, Server 2016, to have the firewalls only letting out traffic from particular IP sources as opposed to outbound? Or do you have only these specific programs?
You can do specific sources. I can go show you that real quick.
That might be
I mean, by default, it's a little bit trickier, but you can like create a specific rule to go to like to only allow to a specific IP. Is that what you're asking? Yeah.
So it's easy. Yes, because you're not one. If you also open the rule, so click it, there should be a scope tab, and then you can specify IP addresses and stuff.
Yeah, I won't go through. Do it. Anything else? All right. Injects.
Do you want to do the meetings first then? Or?
Sure.
All right.
So first, I'd like to thank these two for grading all your injects, and thank Nick for making an amazing rubric. So first, I'll talk about the first two meetings. The first one was really informal. The one thing I would have to say there is you guys did pretty good. Was overall impressed. You were friendly. You didn't try to overtalk or undertalk. The one thing is make sure that you study the document you get sent out and, before the competition starts, so you know what all the boxes are, what all the services on the boxes are. And when you walk into any meeting, be prepared for them to ask you questions about what's up, what's down, and be able to justify your answers to those. For the second meeting, if in the sheet it says presentation, I would recommend you use a presentation, not a document, not an inject that you already turned in for a separate inject. Make a presentation, make sure it's dumbed down. We don't want to see, we had two teams walk in with their executive summary. So that has all the server names on it. Don't show that to the higher ups. They are going to go, what's this? What's that? What's this? You're going to get off track. And then you have to sit there for most of the time explaining what certain terms mean, like LDAP and DNS and stuff like that. When you should be talking about what your team did, how they're going to improve the network, and that's what they really care about, and how you're going to make the network better. So that was the main things is, and don't, we did have an issue where you would get too far technically in depth. If you feel like you're starting to lose the room, don't, like, you should be, that's one of the biggest things is just read the room. So that's really all I had for meetings, otherwise really good.
So just a few notes on general injects. You see the rubric behind us. Like the network report rubric had quite a few things that we looked for in it. And we had a few, overall we had some pretty good submissions, and then we also had some submissions that ended up being a little bit lacking. Could use a little more content. We'll flesh out like what we would look for a little bit down the line. But this is just a good look at the rubric of what we're looking for and how you get certain amounts of points in terms of the weighting.
Or if you didn't include the section at all, you didn't get any points for that section. There was a 0 option for everything.
And then if you look specifically at like the network report like we have shown above, you look at, am I counting right? That's the 5th, the vulnerabilities coverage, where it asks you to cover so many systems and the vulnerabilities on each. Try to cover as many as you can, but we had one saying, oh, we found no vulnerabilities, so nothing to report. Just saying we probably wouldn't be having this competition if there were no vulnerabilities on those systems. There probably wouldn't be a need to check for them, but granted there might not be a specific name, but say, hey, there's a possible way for them to get a shell through here, or a backdoor through here, and stuff you can do about it later on down the line. You don't have to be super specific. Just say that system's not perfect. It might be here and here that it happens. Just throw something in there on a certain amount of systems. Try not to leave anything blank if you can. And another set of rubrics here.
Yeah, we did. I chose the rubrics that I pulled from the spreadsheet. So these were the rubrics we actually looked at as we were putting points in for your team. So there's I chose the 3 rubrics that I think we got the least content for. The one on the slide back, the network report rubric, I think, had the most zeros of all of the scores. Did you look at those?
Yeah, something like it.
Yeah. It was like there's specific sections we were looking for that just weren't in the report. I chose these other 2 as well because I thought they would be great to go over. Like for the foreshadow rubric, you're looking for scans of the systems. Did those teams you graded show any of the scans?
There weren't any specific mentions of we checked this system and this system for possibility of bugs, or like we went to this area and found no proof, or they didn't really there weren't a whole lot of specifics of what they did to look for it in the systems that they checked to look for it. So it could use more information there on the more specifics of where you're looking when you're looking for any vulnerabilities or bugs. And then just to go kind of like on how you can get more of those points, this part's not really related to the specific content of the inject itself, but there's a lot of different ways you can also get extra points, even if you don't have the exact content that the inject wants. Formality is a big thing when it comes to injects, because you have to imagine you are the IT team in this scenario, and your superintendent is asking for a write-up on, say, your network report. You want it to be as formal as possible. If you want to throw in a small pun here and there, I don't think you'll lose your job from the superintendent, but try to be as serious and formal as you can. A PDF document is also really nice.
On that note, from here on out, in all future injects, if it's not PDF or Word doc, it doesn't count.
Yeah.
And we'll put that in policy so it'll be well known. But we'll be changing that from now on for all mocks. Everything must be in PDF or Word doc or some state or something like that. So just sort of.
I just want to know why you have to bring that up, because wouldn't it be kind of obvious?
Well,
we only had one team turn in PDFs, every
Yep.
other team turned Google Docs, which there's nothing wrong with that because we never
Oh.
outlined it before.
One team turned in Word docs.
Or Word docs?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Google Docs were turned in. It's not.
It was all Google.
It's not an issue in this last one, like where we started taking away points, because we never outlined that. It's just in the future, we're going to do PDFs. Also, just so you can't change what you're turning in.
Yeah, remember sometimes I was looking at reading the Google Doc, going through, reading the report, making grades, and I can still see the owner of the Google Doc on the page making edits while I was reading it.
So that's also an important point. If you're submitting an injection, you should probably be done with it. If you need to make an edit and resubmit, that's fine. But if you're gonna make changes to it, don't say, "Hey, you're good to look at this" while you're still making the changes.
Another thing we ran into a few times was I'd open the Google Doc and I wouldn't have edit permissions on the Google or view permissions on the Google Doc, so I'd be completely denied access to the Google Doc. So I'd have to go back to the Inject Handler and say, "Hey, I need permissions to view this."
And that should hopefully be ignored with the PDF thing, as you just upload it to PDF and we could view it straight from the Slack. Sorry,
Yeah.
No problem. And then another thing that we noticed that a lot of them, except for one team I believe, were missing were like the email memo templates. I think it was only one team that submitted those. They don't have to be super long. I believe there's the Injects Google Drive that was shared a few weeks back when we went over the Injects, and we could probably relink it again if necessary, but it has a nice template for you to use, just the memo saying, hey, superintendent, here's that report you wanted on the network. Here it is. You're free to look at it.
Yeah.
Have fun, you know, good luck, all that stuff.
This goes back to the whole professionality standpoint we took earlier.
And then one final point on formality. Most teams had it. Anything I say here isn't saying like, oh, we didn't see it on anyone's team. It's just points, areas where you can gain or lose points in the future. Is table of contents is nice. Most teams, I believe, had it. There might have been a few instances where it wasn't, but table of contents is always nice if you have different sections that are of different focuses.
One thing to remember is that you can always turn things in late. Even though we set a deadline, if you turn in after the deadline, you can still get half points. There are some teams that after the deadline they just didn't turn anything in, or like with the HTTPS inject, no one turned it in. That's a lot of points lost on that one inject.
A nice point about that is too, as we have mentioned in our first sub point on that, is a late submission that's really good is better than a submission that you did in 2 minutes and submitted at 5:44 when it's due at 5:45. If you need to take longer to finalize it, get your sources, make it make sense, and make the inject actually cover some ground on the page and not just be a few sentences, that's a lot better than 2 sentences right as the deadline hits, because there's not a lot of information for us to work out with that one. Therefore, you're probably going to lose more points. Yes, it's late, you'll lose half points, but if you're going to get a 3 across the board on it, with it being late, you'll still get a 1.5 on everything, which is better than a 0 and a 1 on everything for having 2 sentences. And remembering your audience, as Nathan mentioned, like when you're giving your presentation at the end, you don't kind of want to keep in mind of who the audience is. They may not know every technical term. They may not know exactly what a PF sense box is and how it functions, or PF sense. I'm losing my words, sorry, but
that also goes for the injects themselves, because the injects are going to the superintendent, not going to the IT team of the school. Since you guys were the IT team, this is going to the superintendent, so it should have been at a level that the superintendent could read.
In the future, you should really pay attention to that, because you might have an inject that goes maybe to a CEO. But remember, you guys are contractors, so at the end of the week, you ain't going to be there anymore. So it might also be like your network report should be very technical, should be outlining stuff, because that'll go to the IT team for the school, and they'll use that. So it's really watch who that's going to. CEO, non-technical. IT team needs to be technical. You agree with that, Nick? Yep.
Yeah, that's where we have like the over-explaining subpoints, so you can have those extra details in there. And even if you want to keep some lighter details in there for the CEO and over-explain it to him, just so if he has questions, he can come to you with a better question that's easier for you guys to find an answer to. Or just make it easier for the CEO to understand what's going on. So those few extra details and over-explaining a little bit can go a long ways for the CEO and the IT team that's going to be feted eventually.
Oh, you had some injects that people use, like said this university or this study was conducted that showed this result. A link or a citation for that would be great in the future, since you would need to do that in a professional setting. So your source of your information. You can't just put the name in there and say that this happened without backing up your source.
Yeah, don't name drop probably wasn't the most accurate title for it. If you want to drop like a university or an institute that studies these things, that's fine. Just do provide the citation to it at the bottom, or put the link in it somewhere, just so we can go to it and be like, okay, this is real. Or like for the CEO, and for instance, if the CEO is reading this, they're going to want to know why this institute matters. Why should we care that you link them and said, oh, cybersecurity is important? Like, give them a reason to feel like you citing that university or institute actually matters, and why you should implement something that they say they should implement. A good example would be like, if you want to drop the name DSU in a report, say like, oh, DSU says we should turn on our firewall because it keeps the bad guys out. And you say like, according to DSU, which is a premier cybersecurity and cyber science school with an accredited NSA program, says turning on the firewall is good. Stuff like that. Just give your sources a little more weight, so the CEO can be like, oh, okay, the NSA likes them, so they must be smart, and that'll give more weight to them. That'll make it look a little bit more formal, as well as you know where your sources are coming from, and you're not just spewing them out because you saw their name somewhere. Then a little bit on additional content is like, so go into more of the filler of the actual content that would go into the injects. A lot of the submissions we got were rather short. We had some that were in 2 to 3 sentences when they could have been half a page to a full page even, maybe in a page and a half, depending on what the content of it was. Like the network report definitely could have been a good page and a half, depending on how much you put in, how you space it out. But we got some rather short network reports that were averaging like 3 or 4 sentences. And that goes back to where you can lose points on in the rubrics that we showed earlier. If you fail to fill out the content with enough detail for us to work with, you're going to lose your points, especially with some of these injects averaging about 20% of the weight of the total inject value that you can get. It's important to fill these out as much as you can. Especially like if you're getting like a minimum of 30 minutes on these as well, and a good 30 minutes to an hour and a half or hour 15 that you're getting, you should be able to at least get half a page to a page respectively. Of course, some injects won't exactly be able to fill a full page, but you should be able to get a good amount of content to at least fill a nice half a page, get a source or two in there, get it properly captioned, get proper, I'm losing my English here, yeah, you get.
And the next one.
Yeah.
I think the most important note, or one of the most important notes, is on the next slide.
Just
I don't want to do anything else.
Another thing I did notice on a lot of the injects is like to kind of fill the space. If you're wondering, oh, how could I have done this more? If we want to go to, if it's like a bug report and something that we can put on, like a certain piece of software that we could put on the system to prevent this bug, if you really want to draw it out, you could simply go down the list of, give a description of the bug, what are the systems it affects, what to use if it gets in those systems, how do the other systems get it out if we implement a certain piece of software, how can it be implemented on the system to fix it? Is it going to be hard? Is it going to be expensive as well? It's another thing to watch for, because you remember, you're speaking to the CEO here. If you need to actually, if you're recommending them to buy a piece of software, justify it to them. Make it sound like, hey, adding this software that filters our emails will be really good. Explain to them why it's going to be really good. Explain to them it's cost-effective, easy rollout, and easy access. And maybe go into detail on the vendors if you have to. It can add to it and make it seem a lot more sense to the CEO as well, because they're going to want the right vendor to get the right keys and the right access to everything. And the biggest thing that we noticed with a couple of us walking around would be that a lot of inject handlers seems like they were not just, that they weren't having a priority on inject handling.
They were, I talked to one of the teams, and their inject handler was the team leader, the inject handler, and also in charge of 2 boxes. And so they had almost no time to work on injects.
Yeah, so we're thinking that was probably the biggest reason for some of the short inject submissions, because they can definitely fill up a good bit of a page. But if you're an inject handler, you probably don't want to be in charge of the domain controller through other boxes. You're not going to have time to properly fill out these injects, which can make or break the competition in terms of ranking value at the end. As we saw, the points were very, very close. So do be focused on inject handling. Don't be afraid to help others if they ask for it and you have a little bit of downtime. But the injects make up a lot of point value in these competitions, so definitely don't be afraid to focus on these and say, sorry, I can't work on this box. I need to focus on these injects, because this one specifically is 25% of the point value.
On that note, one thing you'll notice in this fast mock was that the 3 teams in the league were all really close, within a few hundred points of each other on services. But there was a 1,500 point lead in injects, and I would chalk that up to, on team 2, their inject handler did not have any boxes. All they did was injects, and that's probably what got them to win.
You could, yeah, as graders, we actually saw the difference in the inject quality for a dedicated inject handler, and people were working on other things.
It's something as an inject handler you need to look at and talk to your team and figure out, because maybe you do need to have a box, maybe you are skilled at one thing or another. But don't be afraid to say, okay, injects are worth half the points. Someone needs to do these and do them very well.
So I think that's the most of notes on our injects, or most of our inject-related notes. If there's any specific questions.
And I think when we're talking about having one dedicated inject handler, the issue isn't like, you don't have to have one person who can only handle injects. It's simply that you need to dedicate more time to injects. And whether that's one person who's only working on injects, or that's 3 people who are just spending a significant amount of time working at injects, but also working their boxes. It's just
more time needs to be spent.
And that's something to think of, because when we're getting like the national level, having one person do all the injects just doesn't work anymore. So a couple people need to be working injects.
Another thing is that if you look at like the national level injects, I think you guys have 30 injects over the 2 days. There's a lot more time in there, so you guys, it's about the same rate of injects. It's not, or sorry, I should say, it's not exponentially more. But one thing is, on the national level, they get a lot more technical injects where you have to change stuff on the systems. That's something we'll be introducing more and more. And on that, you may have to, as an inject handler, partition out. Okay, you're working on this box. I need you to add these admins. Or if you're adding admins to every box, say everybody, we need you to add these admins to your boxes, get them in, and split up the work so everybody's doing a part of it and everybody gets their stuff done, and making sure that people get their stuff done. Because it's not seeable for you to touch every single box and add that in every box when people are already in there. So
Kind of like the HTTP and the inject.
Yeah, and on those technical injects, Google is your friend. When I was testing out the HTTPS inject, I went to Google, I Googled CentOS 7 Apache HTTPS, and there's DigitalOcean guide, 5 minutes, it's really fast. I didn't know how to do it, like off the top of my head, so just like search for that stuff. Most of the time, you're not going to know how to do what they're asking you to do.
All right, so any other questions?
One thing else I have to add. So if you looked at the injects, you noticed that at the top there was a level rating of the inject. There was 3 critical injects. Those 3 critical injects made up well over half of all the inject scores. So make sure you're paying attention to those inject scores and making sure you're prioritizing those. 2 of those were obviously meetings, and 1 was the network report. So if you can nail those 3, there's half your inject score. So do be watching those. The medium ones, those only, can I say how much they had?
They were like 10 to 20%.
They were lower than that.
Oh yeah, the
5 to 10.
mediums were 5.
The mediums were like
10.
5, maybe 10% of your inject score, and then highs were 10 to 15, and then the critical were 15 to 20.
I think they were
so you can
20.
see just how much of a point difference that can be. So it's one thing to keep in mind. Any questions? Awesome.
Well, thanks for letting me sound like a high school English teacher for about 10 minutes.
So, how not to shoot yourself in the foot? This time we averaged around 60% uptime on services, which is better than last time. We had about 47.6% uptime last time.
Are these in respective order, team 1, team 2, team 3?
Yep, team 1, team 2, team 3, team 4.
I think 30% was pretty good. I thought we were playing golf, so.
Yeah. Ideally, you want to be around 90% uptime. Will give you the best. I would categorize that as like the highest you're probably going to get, just with like password changes causing downtime a little bit. But basically, just back up early, back up often. When you modify configs, you're going to break stuff. It's just going to happen. So back up your configs so that when you break stuff, you can fix it. Avoid reverts as much as possible. We didn't have as many reverts this time as we had during the first mock, but just be aware of just how astronomically large that point value is. 350 points is like 15%, like 1 out of 15 of your entire service score. So you can lose a ton of points doing those reverts. At regionals 2 years ago, we lost because we reverted 2 or 3 boxes when we might have actually won if we hadn't done that. So those reverts can really kill you.
In terms of on the Windows side, what would you need to competition?
Dylan might know a little bit better on that. On the web stuff, at least, you can back up your inetpub folder.
Yep.
That's the biggest thing I can think of.
And I have like a Google zip on the desktop too for the Windows one that you could have reinstalled Moodle with, as long as you know how to install Moodle.
And it might take a little bit more work, but you probably could have figured out some way to back up the MS SQL database. Databases are a big thing you want to back up. And coordinating changes is one of the harder parts of not shooting yourself in the foot. When you modify the database password for like Moodle or OwnCloud or Drupal, you have to coordinate that with the person who's actually running that web service, because in their configs they have the username, they have the password in there. It's hard coded. into that config, and someone else on your team has to go in and change that password. One of the things, I mean, obviously, if you're the database person, you can go in and change that like for them. That would be awesome, but obviously that's not going to be feasible a lot of the time. So just having really good communication between your team members, saying, I'm ready to change this password. Are you ready to change this password? Let's do it right now. On your Linux side, being like taking advantage of your virtual terminals. So like, I'm going to set up to change this password in the database, and I can just switch over to my second virtual terminal so I can work on other stuff while I'm waiting for my web person to actually get ready. Just communicate a lot. That's the big thing. And then troubleshooting. Troubleshooting will save you from reverts, basically. Check you want to check, is the service running? Can I access the service locally? If I can, then the scoring engine probably can't access it remotely, or there's something messed up on the service. So you want to check that the scoring engine is actually able to hit it remotely. That can be done through logging. Depending on what service you're running, you might have to enable that. Checking whether there's like firewall stuff in the way. And basically you just want to enable logging as much as possible and dig through that stuff to find out what's wrong. So, any questions about not shooting yourself in the foot? All right, so let's talk high-level strategy. So, basically I'm going to walk you through how we try to keep red team out of our networks. So, system prioritization. What is the most important piece of our network? Is the firewall. If the network router goes down, everything goes down. That's basically how we try to prioritize systems. Later on, like next semester, we're going to get ESXi servers. Those might support like 8 to like 10 systems on them. And so those are going to be really big as well. So generally it goes network firewall, ESXi servers, then our domain controller. Our domain controller, if that goes down, we lose basically anything that's using domain accounts. Then DNS. So say maybe the scoring engine might be using domain names to actually connect to your web servers or to whatever service you're running. If your DNS goes down, the scoring engine can't hit that, and then your service is down. Another thing that's a little bit more subtle is that your, say your web server is connecting to a database, it might use a domain name to connect to the database instead of an IP address. And you might not catch that right away. So if your DNS goes down, your web server will go down, but none of your other services will, because the scoring engine might not be using domain names. But so that's just something to really keep an eye out for. DNS can really cripple your network. Then obviously databases. Generally in these competitions, you'll have 1 or 2 web apps, like depending on one database. At regionals last year, we had like 4 or 5 web apps running on one database, and those were all scored. So that's a huge amount of points that are dependent on those databases. So you really gotta like prioritize those systems so you're securing them early and securing them well. So leveraging the pfSense. The network router is basically the most effective tool you have in these competitions. It's a quick and easy way to firewall all of your systems all at once. And along with good host firewalls, you can basically cut off red team once for all. Yes? We have not. In the past, we've had Juniper, which we're going to be getting into next semester. And then more recently, they've been moving to Palo Alto, which is an incredible network firewall that we're going to have a lot of fun with.
Like always have network firewall?
Always have network firewall, yes. Yes, yes. So on the right here, we have basically all of the ways, at least I could think of, that red team can get into your systems. And then all of the ways they can get persistence and keep persistence on your systems. So we're going to walk through how basically our checklist works in cutting off those access methods. So the first thing you do when you get on a box, obviously, is change system passwords. That's going to deny a lot of red team's entry points. Generally, the way they get in is over SSH and SMB. If you change your passwords, they can't get in that way. Most of the time, they're going to have gotten in already, but there's not much you can do about that. They won't be able to get in again once you kick them out. Then, obviously, on the Linux side, you want to disable SSH keys. That's an authentication bypass that red team can use. You want to get rid of that. Then we can move on to firewalls. So basically, the philosophy with firewalls is you want to cut off all red team communications. So so that they can't talk in and out. You might have persistence on your box, but it doesn't matter because they can't talk. So easiest way to do inbound firewall stuff is on the network router, because you can just cut off everything all at once. It's all done in one place. Generally speaking, you're going to have secured that system way at the beginning of the competition, and so it's generally pretty unlikely that red team has actually gotten into it. If you change that password within like the first 60 seconds, you're probably pretty safe. But you're going to want to do this on both the network and the host level, just to have that defense in depth in case you screw something up on the network firewall. You still have that backup on the host. And it also prevents red team from pivoting from box to box inside your network. So if they have persistence on one system, they can't leverage that to access your other hosts through your firewall. Just basically bypassing your firewall altogether. Any questions on that? Cool. You can stop me at any time. So then pfSense outbound firewall. On the network level, like egress filtering is pretty tricky, because you have to allow for the fact that people are going to want to talk out on HTTP and HTTPS and use DNS and things like that. Like I want to go out to the internet to like Google things. I want to download patches, things like that. Obviously, you can't just block that all at the network firewall level. You have to be a little bit more selective. So basically what we want to do is just block everything except those 3 ports, the HTTP, HTTPS, and DNS. Because those are the only things we should theoretically be using. Then obviously you want to do that on the host outbound firewalls as well. So on the host, you'll block off that 80, 443, and 53, along with basically everything else to get that defense in depth. The tricky thing about host firewalls, they're hard to do consistently, because obviously sometimes you're going to want to go out to the internet and grab patches and things like that. The best way to do that basically is to just, when you need something, open up your firewall, then when you're done, close it off. So you want to leave that time interval as small as possible where red team can actually talk out. And so as you can see, we've basically cut off basically 95% of red team's ability to like use persistence on our systems. And that's all through firewalls. So back to passwords. So once you've done your system passwords and your firewall stuff, we get down to regular application passwords. So that's going to be your MySQL stuff. Samba on Linux has a different password system than the actual system. Depending on your web application, you have to kind of watch out for those types of things. Does my application use a different password storage place than my actual system does? Then you change your web application passwords. And then once you've done that, red team has no way in, no way to talk in and out except through exploiting your vulnerable systems and through web shells. Then most PHP web shells you can block with PHP INI. We talked about that at the last mock debrief. Basically what you want to do is disable the functions in PHP which let them access the terminal or the system syscalls. Then with exploits are pretty tricky. So most of the time you're going to be able to block off like 90% of things that are exploitable. But obviously, if your scores services are exploitable, there's not much you can do. Basically, you want to patch what you're able to patch. So you're going to patch MSO8, 067. You're going to patch Eternal Blue. If you can't do that, you could try to mitigate. So you disable SMB v1. You implement like a web application firewall. So like if I have SQL injection on my web app, I might not necessarily know how to upgrade that to a newer version so that that's not an issue anymore. But I can set up like a web application firewall so I can block those attacks when they come in. So at this point, are we safe? Sort of. Red team shouldn't be able to do a whole lot at this point unless you undo anything of what you just did. So we're in sort of like a fragile, delicate balance right now. Red team can't talk out, but you can't talk out either. So anytime you allow outbound for internet access, generally speaking, red team's going to be able to talk out too. So just want to keep that outbound talking as little as possible throughout the competition. So once you've got all that done, just to be safe, it's always good to find your persistence and destroy it. So persistence, you're typically going to find it in like places that are going to be run periodically. So I try to split it up into 3 categories. So you got scheduled tasks. That's your cron jobs. Your task scheduler on Windows. And then you got triggered tasks. So these are like login scripts. So whenever I log in into a Linux system, there's a script called etc profile that gets run every time I log in. There's a script in my home directory called home directory.bash_rc or .profile that gets run. Then you got your boot scripts. So that's etcrc.local on Linux. Don't know what it is on Windows. And then obviously your services. So red team might install like a malicious service on your box, and then every time you boot up, that service will start, and it'll kick off their persistence. And then you got more user-triggered stuff like Trojanized executables. So I can replace your ls with my ls, which kicks off my persistence and then runs ls for you. That's fairly transparent to the user, so you have to be watch out for that with like integrity checkers like deb sums and things like that, and then aliases. Any questions? I know that was a lot of information. Yeah.
You guys set up boxes and also like network conversations. How much configuration up there? Like is there on the services? Is at some point my FTP was just completely trashed, just reinstalled it? Is that like bad to do? So you guys have mess with configs when you set things up?
We mess with configs a little bit. It depends on the service. FTP generally I'll just like set the directory that I'm the directory it should serve out of. There's not a whole lot you can do through configs on FTP that can make it super vulnerable, other than like allowing anonymous access and things like that. I don't know if you guys know.
Well, just in that case, so if you reinstall FTP from the ground up, did you store the files that were in that directory before?
I don't know, it's first bit APT and install it.
Which directory did you purge?
FTPD.
Okay, yeah, obviously you just uninstall the service.
Yeah.
Well, it shouldn't wipe that directory out, and you install and then point it back to that directory, it should work. So.
I mean, depending on how advanced the competition gets, they might put in like certain checks to say like, I should not be able to write to this directory or something like that, which can be in the configs. But it's just something. As long as you back up your configs way at the beginning of the competition, you should be safe to do that. Just uninstall, reinstall, copy those configs back. You should be good to go.
Back to the data directory too.
Yeah, obviously back to the data directory. Any other questions? Yeah.
Is it legal to like segment the networks and like determine whether access can only have access to my network?
Depends on the scenario. So for example, if you have like a database server connecting to a web application, right? Or the web application connects to the database server. As long as the database server is not supported by the scoring engine, you can definitely make that so that only the web application box can talk to it. But in the case of this competition, where I think we're directly querying the database server too, right?
Yep.
You wouldn't be able to do that necessarily. Well, the problem is, again, it depends on the scenario, because in some cases they might be switching the scoring engine's IP address every now and then. In a case where there's just one scoring IP, then technically yes. But if they're switching it, you have the potentiality to lose points, because then the IP address is going to change.
And normally, if they're not switching the scoring engine IP address, it's normally part of the rules that you cannot whitelist the IP addresses of the scoring engine, because that kind of breaks the entire competition. Because in the real world, you're going to have multiple clients from multiple locations, and red team has the ability to switch IP addresses. So normally, you're not allowed to do that sort of filtering to either only allow the scoring engine or block out red team.
If you are fairly confident in IP addresses, red team, you can certainly block them. There's never anything against that. You do run the risk, though, that the scoring engine will also look at that IP and those points for checks and comes around. Generally, that's it.
Any other questions? All right, that's all we have for today. Thanks for coming out to the mock on Sunday. We'll hope to see you at the next one. November 18th, we're thinking. So.
Are the items out for that yet?
Not yet. That'll come out, I think, next week. We'll do that.
Thank you.